Thank you for joining us for our Learn at Lunch session, Phase 2 BruinIRB Launch Timeline. My name is Rebecca Florestella. I am the Assistant Director for Reliance and Regulatory Management, and I will be overseeing the transition of all webIRB submissions to BruinIRB. As many of you may be aware, the transition from webIRB to BruinIRB has been conducted using a staged approach. Currently, BruinIRB is open and is used for the processing of emergency use, expanded access, right to try, humanitarian use device, and Reliance study submissions. We've had over 2 years experience with a variety of users for each type of these submissions. The feedback has been positive, and for the most part, users seem to be satisfied with the BruinIRB application. It is based on this feedback that we feel that we're now in a good place to fully transition all submissions over to BruinIRB by the end of 2024. We want to continue to do this in a step-by-step manner so to minimize any potential impact on researchers and their study teams. First of all, we'd like to focus on requiring that all new submissions be managed in BruinIRB as of September 2024. This would include submissions to be reviewed by the full board, expedited review, and exempt submissions, in addition to those that are already being submitted to BruinIRB. In October 2024, we anticipate that the migration of all approved studies from webIRB to BruinIRB. And so at that point, we would then require amendment submissions to be managed in BruinIRB. By the end of the year, we hope to have all continuations and PARs also submitted to BruinIRB so that every type of IRB submission is now being processed in BruinIRB after we return from winter break. Many of you may be asking, why is it necessary? Why do we need to move to a new IRB submission system? It's important that you understand that webIRB is a pretty aged application platform. It's over 13 years old, and it's highly customized and requires significant IT support to manage. More importantly, the current version of the webIRB application platform is no longer supported by the vendor. The vendor has moved on to a higher version of the application that uses a streamlined workflow. It simplifies the submissions by focusing on the upload of a scientific protocol or a human subject protocol supplement designed to obtain the information required for the IRB to make regulatory determinations. The application will continue to ask questions to identify necessary ancillary reviews and to help to assess the required level of review. Finally, BruinIRB offers a streamlined user interface, which has received positive feedback from our current users. As we transition to BruinIRB, there is some terminology that you will see appear in educational announcements and materials. One of the first terms that we want you to be familiar with is legacy study. Legacy studies refers to a currently approved study in webIRB that has no open amendment, continuation, or PAR submissions. In-flight studies, in contrast, is a study in webIRB that has an open amendment, continuation, or PAR, or is a new study that hasn't been approved yet. These are all studies that are in review and are pending. Migrated studies refers to webIRB studies that have been transferred to BruinIRB, and they are no longer to create or submit any type of submission in webIRB. It's a view-only access. Our migration plan will focus first on legacy studies. The first group of legacy studies to be transitioned to BruinIRB will be full board submissions with a continuing review requirement. These will be migrated during the month of September in order to minimize any impact on the upcoming required continuing review. After this, expedited studies with no continuing review requirement will be transitioned to BruinIRB in the month of October. Finally, For in-flight studies, as the pending submission is approved and completed, it will be migrated over to BruinIRB, likely on a weekly basis. So how will we get to these goals? This chart shows a timeline of key events that has to occur before we can initiate our full transition to BruinIRB. You will note that during the months of May through July, we will continue our development and testing, finalize protocol templates and IRB supplements, user guides, and updates to the BruinIRB webpage. These are key foundational steps that must occur to keep our timeline in check. If we discover issues or concerns during these phases, that may push back the date on which we are able to transition to BruinIRB. Also, during the summer months, we will focus on training for the research community that includes IRB staff, IRB members, and researchers and their regulatory support staff. Our goal is to give you enough training to help you confidently navigate and manage BruinIRB. On September 9, 2024, we anticipate that all new studies will be submitted in BruinIRB. That means the Create New Study button and webIRB will no longer be available to you. We also will complete the migration of all legacy full board studies in the month of September, and will encourage anyone who has migrated to BruinIRB to create their continuation and required amendment in BruinIRB. Every migrated study in BruinIRB will have to open an amendment to answer new and required questions. This amendment can be done as soon as migration is completed or at your next amendment submission. In October, we'll complete the migration of all legacy webIRB expedited studies. And with the migration of all approved studies, future amendments must be submitted in BruinIRB. Studies in the state withdrawn will no longer be able to be reactivated in webIRB. If the study team wants to continue with that submission, they'll have to create it in BruinIRB. We will begin our contact of studies and pre-submissions in September when we begin the new study requirement in BruinIRB. Studies in pre-submission will be advised that if they do not enter the IRB review process in webIRB by the end of September, by the end of October, they will be automatically withdrawn, and the study team will need to recreate that submission in BruinIRB to be reactivated. So after October 2024, anything in pre-submission will be automatically withdrawn in webIRB. And on December 1st, webIRB will close to continuation and PAR submissions in the hope of completing the migration of all studies in webIRB by the end of December. When we return from winter break on January 3rd, 2025, BruinIRB will be used for all submissions. Migration of in-flight webIRB submissions will continue on a weekly basis until all active submissions have been migrated to BruinIRB. So migration is something that can sound a bit scary and sound like it can involve a lot of work. Luckily, with the talent of our UCLA IT services team, they are able to program most of the transition for you. Like questions will be transferred into BruinIRB, limiting the number of questions you will have to be asked to require as part of a future amendment. This whole process should be seamless to the researcher and the study team. Legacy studies will be migrated in batches in the month of September. This means that approved studies for a single investigator may be migrated at different time points. So if you have an investigator with 25 open and approved studies, it may be that 10 of those studies are migrated the first week, another 10 the second week, and 5 will be migrated week 3. So they won't be migrated. All your investigator studies will not be migrated at the same time. For any study that's migrated to BruinIRB, the majority of questions should be repopulated as part of the migration process. However, there are new and required questions in BruinIRB that can only be addressed as part of a future amendment. So you can do that as soon as migration occurs, or you can wait to do it until you have an amendment that has to take place. But there will be that required amendment. webIRB will be maintained in a view-only format for a limited period of time for migrated studies. This is something that seems to be of great concern because people are afraid of losing access to their regulatory documents and their approvals. This is a reminder that study teams should really make it a priority to review their regulatory binders and make sure they have all the required documentation for any future auditing purposes. We, of course, will announce to campus the planned date for the deactivation of webIRB, but you don't need to panic. This shouldn't be a source of concern or stress for you. We anticipate webIRB will be available to you in view-only access for at least a year, if not longer. You don't have to take any immediate action, and you should just, as part of good practice, good research practices, be sure to maintain your regulatory binder updated and current. So once your study is migrated, how will you know? There'll be several signs posted in webIRB. First, the current state of your study will change to migrated from approved. You'll also have a link to your BruinIRB ID number. Many of you will note that the ID number may change a little bit. Basically, webIRB uses an 8-digit IRB ID number that has preceding zeros. BruinIRB only utilizes a 6-digit IRB number, so the 2 preceding zeros will be eliminated in BruinIRB. This will not cause any concerns with anyone who also links their IRB approved study to Encore. We have not identified any issues with the many reliance studies that are required to submit to Encore, and there's been no issue with sharing of information or the required connection to Encore. Likewise, in BruinIRB, you will have a link to your legacy webIRB ID number that will bring you back into webIRB and give you access to the history and the documents related to prior reviews. What can you do to set yourself up for success for this transition? We strongly encourage you to register for our Learn at Lunch sessions. We also ask you to anticipate the September transition to BruinIRB for new studies. To help you prepare for that, during the summer, we will be posting the IRB protocol templates and supplements that may help you prepare for studies that you would like to have reviewed around this time. We ask you to attend trainings to facilitate the submission of planned studies. In the same sense, you want to anticipate and plan for any protocol amendments that you may be receiving this summer or early in the fall. If the approval for your study expires 10/1 to 12/31, we're going to encourage you to use BruinIRB to create a CRAM, a combined continuation and amendment submission. This allows you not only to complete the required continuing review, but also to get that required amendment finished so that you can address the new and required questions. And finally, it's up to you to maintain your study regulatory binder and confirm all approval memos, study snapshots, and approved consents are readily available to you. When a second step of migration is that a snapshot of the last approved submission in webIRB will be transferred to BruinIRB for your future reference, but that's your last approved submission. So if you have not downloaded your approvals and revised documents related to prior amendments, you want to be able to do that. For those of you who need help on how to set up your regulatory binder and what it should contain, we've included a link here from CTSI Research Go site that will give you information on the regulatory binder and suggested contents. Another question we have is, do I need to sign up for a BruinIRB account? And no, you don't. Both BruinIRB and webIRB use the UCLA single sign-on login. Therefore, if you have an active webIRB account, you will automatically be granted a BruinIRB account. You can actually log in there today with your SSO. You won't see anything because likely, unless you're involved in reliance or an emergency use application, you haven't submitted anything to BruinIRB. And it works the same way. You can only see studies for which you're an approved study team member. So if you're not listed on an approved submission, you won't have access to view anything. So we have scheduled several Learn at Lunch presentations to help you prepare for this change. The first of which will be the BruinIRB protocol uploads, which will help explain the new documents that will provide the bulk of information necessary for IRB review. We'll review the different templates and show you how you can use these to begin preparing for new submissions that you anticipate in fall of 2024. We'll also have a presentation on migration, how that works, what you can anticipate, hopefully address any of your questions or concerns, and what you'll have access to in webIRB while webIRB is maintained in a read-only status. We will have a presentation on creating an amendment and a combined continuation and amendment in BruinIRB to help prepare you for your first amendment in the new system. Finally, we will have a presentation on how to submit new studies in BruinIRB that'll walk you through the process for more common submissions. We'll repeat the session on continuation amendments in August, as well as the session on new studies. In addition to the Learn at Lunch sessions, we have OHRP Zoom drop-in. And these are sessions where you can speak to a member of our team, bring your questions, your concerns, your suggestions. Our upcoming sessions are on May 23rd and June 6th, and we hope to see you there with any questions or concerns you may have. Finally, this is my contact information for any questions you may have about this presentations. If your department or your research group would like a specific training or session, a Q&A session to address any questions or concerns, you can request that by contacting our QI team at OHRPP EQI@research.ucla.edu. Any technical assistance with BruinIRB, any concerns you're seeing can be directed to the BruinIRB at research.ucla.edu. And then, of course, for any questions on your currently approved study, your best contact is your assigned analyst, and their name is available in your workspace. And if you have general questions, there's also a link for requesting a consult. We thank you for your time, your cooperation, and for all the feedback and your help in developing this new system and making the transition as smooth as possible. We look forward to the successful deployment of the phase 2 of BruinIRB. Thank you.